I'd like to invite the Honorable Justice Shahid Karim Saab to give his remarks on the memory of his late father.
Distinguished guests, first of all, thank you very much, LUMS, for arranging this function for my late father, Justice FAZAL Karim. Thank you, Dr. Saab, for gracing this occasion, and Fazal Siddiqui, Justice Jawad Hassan, the Dean, everyone, Justice Jilani Saab. There have been brilliant speeches by the speakers here. Justice Jawad delved into the concept of using his work as a secondary law in the judgments. And there was a brilliant analysis of, critical analysis of his works by Mr. Fazal Siddiqui, and a lovely speech by Dr. Parvez Hassan. I'll take a detour and be a little more personal about what he was as a father, as a person, as we know him, as a family. Justice Fazal Karim was the prodigious, in my opinion, legal scholar, and he championed and defended the constitutional democracy in an outpouring of judicial precedents and influential books that appeared not only on the college syllabuses, but also cited in Superior Court judgments. He's the only Pakistani scholar that I know of, and I may be wrong, whose books have been referred in other jurisdictions, particularly in the Indian academic scholarly works. And his books have found place in the Library of Congress of the United States as well. So from a vaunted perch at the Supreme Court, he flew in the face of almost every trend and was fondly remembered as a dissenting judge. This was the term used by the Chief Justice at that time in his speech, in his closing reference, that he was a dissenting judge. That, in my opinion, is a great compliment to a judge. He is, by any reckoning, one of the most stimulating literary presences in the last half century, and Mr. Fazal Siddiqui has eruditely, delved into that subject. A singular breed of scholar, teacher, critic, judge. At the heart of his writing was a passionate love of literature and a relish for its heroic figures. You would notice that in his works, there's a mention to Alice in Wonderland, to other figures, literary figures. He insisted that a literary work is not a social document, but asked instead that we prize the astonishing mystery of creative genius. He wrote in one of his diaries that I got hold of after his passing, and this is a little topic, this is a little heading that he wrote in his diary about myself. And what did he write? And I quote, on his appointment as a Supreme Court Justice, Justice Holmes wrote, and he's talking about Oliver Wendell Holmes, the iconic Supreme Court Justice of the US Supreme Court. Alas, gentlemen, that is life. We cannot live our dreams. Now he continues, Justice Holmes, a great man and one of the greatest US Supreme Court judges, could dream. But I could, given my circumstances, not even dream of becoming a judge of the Supreme Court. But after becoming a Supreme Court judge, I had hardly slightly more than 2 years there. I did try to justify it. I wrote some judgments which are still remembered and quoted. For example, one of them, Ali Muhammad versus State, has in a recent judgment of the Supreme Court evoked such great praise for me from Justice Qazi Faiz Isa, whom I don't know, whom I never met. And this now he quotes from the judgment. Ali Muhammad versus State is the seminal judgment authored by Fazal Karim J, one of the most logical, lucid, and coherent judicial minds who had the added gift of articulation. And then he concludes, do I deserve this praise? I don't know, but I read Ali Muhammad again. Its para 30 in particular gave me joy. As Holmes said, but for purposes of joy, one needs recognition, intelligent and to the point. Unquote. Towards the twilight of his life, he finally got recognition. His life was honored and celebrated by a corner in the Lahore High Court Museum, which is courtesy Justice Jawad Hassan, who's a member of that committee. The government conferred Civil Award of Hilal-e-Imtiaz to recognize his achievements, though brazenly unaware of his true heritage, of what great things he had achieved and the legacy he had bequeathed to the coming generations. He was happy that he was rewarded, and with that thought, he passed away. But the sadness in his eyes kept growing in the thought that though I've done my part, but that part was not enough. And I looked around in that ceremony and at the majority of the recipients and realized the rot that had set in. A constitutional colossus like him being honored in the company of pygmies and dwarfs. I'm sorry to use these words. And recently, Justice Jawad Hassan has given a judgment, and he has said that this is not right. There has to be a criteria on giving the civil awards. You cannot just dole it out to anybody you like. So thank you, Justice Jawad Hassan. But that is the general decay in the social values that we are mired in, a decay of monumental proportions, which in turn feeds through the national psyche and now rests on a blatant disregard for the rule of law and constitutional commands. I'm not talking about that little man that Winston Churchill talked about when he said that that little man walks into a little booth and with a little pencil in his hand makes a little cross. I'm not talking about that man. I'm talking about people in the position of authority who have taken oath, like me. We have violated our oaths to uphold the Constitution, and the result is a stark regression in the judicial protection of human rights. As observed by Lord Bingham in his book, The Rule of Law, failure to preserve the fundamental rights of the individual against the form of elective despotism. That is what I think we are going through now. It was this feeling of betrayal that I witnessed in his eyes while he was slowly fading away. The message that he conveyed without equivocation through his eyes, yet did not utter, that was how he was. He wouldn't utter these things. He just gave the message through his eyes, which I could discern, was something like to this effect. I have stood for constitutional all my life and advocated the primacy of the Constitution and the rule of law. Yet my message has fallen on deaf ears, and instead a state of constitutional crisis is the order of the day. Somewhere again in his diary he wrote, "Every people have judges they deserve." I read it in his diary. The true quote is of a French philosopher who said that every country has the government it deserves. He modified it and did a little of variation of his own and wrote, and he never said this to me, actually. I've read it in his diary. He felt so passionately about it, this aspect that he had to write, that every people have judges they deserve. Now, we live in an era of dysfunctional constitution which has led to the constitutional dictatorship, and we find ourselves in this melee largely because there is a decay in the norms and institutions that sustain a democratic republic. And I have no qualms in saying we have a dysfunctional judiciary which has failed in its constitutional duty to stem the rot. His gaze at the end reminded me of a saying by a Chinese philosopher, Lin Yu Tang, who said that when small men begin to cast big shadows, it means that the sun is about to set. But he also knew the trick of life, which is to keep moving. He often said, quoting Cora Brooks, who is a poet and an activist, "I am in the afterlife already. Each day is a bonus." He went away with his head high. He did not stumble. He did not falter. He did not abdicate his duty. He was never disloyal to the Constitution and the rule of law. He did not practice the jurisprudence of fear, and I emphasize, jurisprudence of fear. He had a passion for learning and reading, and above all, did language. True to what Toni Morrison said in her Nobel lectures of 1993, who said that we die, that may be the meaning of life, but we do language, that may be the measure of our lives. He embodied the aphorism by Sadi, excel in yourself so that you can create a beautiful world. He wrote and was able to ward off death. In my opinion, he lived those fulfilling years. He passed away at the age of 92 because he was writing. And that is what kept death at bay. That is what I believe. And that is what Harold Bloom, the literary genius, thought. And like Bloom for Justice Fazal Karim, the worst part about death was surely that he could not take a book with him. He was in love with books. He practiced the discipline of gratitude. And what do we mean by that? Count your blessings and be grateful. That is called the discipline of gratitude. He strongly felt that there is an intimate connection between the obligation to obey the law, the dignity of responsibility, and the principle of discipline of gratitude. We have so much to be grateful for. We live in a country that, with places of breathtaking beauty, we cannot be such great ingrates as not to be thankful to the merciful providence for all these favors, for all these blessings. He firmly believed that Pakistan will be morphed into an ideal society if the rule of law is observed, with special emphasis on the obedience to law and its related moral value, that is, the discipline of gratitude. The best way to be grateful is to obey the laws. And he was very fond of this couplet by Zauq, which he has in his library also. Duniya bhi ek bahisht hai Allah re karam, किन नेमतों को हुक्म दिया है जवाज़ का. He was completely enamored by the concept of rule of law. He was infatuated with the story of Socrates and continued to use it as the most outstanding example of the obligation to obey the law. As you are aware, there was a class of philosophers in his time whose philosophy was somewhat similar to that of Karl Marx, namely that might makes right, and that laws serve only to protect the interests of the powerful. Socrates, however, believed in the unqualified compliance with the law. He thought that every citizen has entered into a social contract with the state to obey its laws. Socrates not only preached that principle, but also died for it. As you all know, he was asked by his disciples to run away. They had made all arrangements. But he said that, no, I would rather drink that poison than run away. I have chosen to obey the laws, and I will stay here. And if I am condemned to that, so be it. So, and that is what makes Socrates immortal, and that makes Justice Fazal Karim immortal, in my opinion. Khalil Gibran said, let the earth take that which is hers, for I, man, have no ending. That is what I think. Justice Fazal Karim has no ending. He transcended ordinary relationships as father, husband, brother, etc., and cannot be viewed in that narrow paradigm. He had a much broader canvas and was a man of humanity. That is his proper place in history, for anything less is likely to diminish the extent of his contribution. He embodied the inscription on the tomb of Justice Walmsley. His inside was his outside. He never sought to make fair shows of what he never thought. His life was a miracle of God. And if you don't believe in miracles, you have to study the life of Justice Fazal Karim, as I know. There's some intimate parts of his life that others don't know, but I will tell you that it was a miracle of God. And I'm compelled to learn that conclusion after all these years. There's no explanation for his stellar achievements judicially and academically. We're all travelers looking to make this journey of life, and we do that through human actions of extraordinary character to achieve honor and success. His, on the other hand, was a preordained path. He always had the hand of God to guide him seamlessly in his journey, as is the case with all great men. And I'll just pause to give you an inkling into one thing which most of you perhaps don't know. All of the speakers have referred to his 3 books. They were not his 3 books. They were more than that. You're not aware of his first book, and it was titled Jurisdiction and Judicial Review. That is a book he wrote when he was a district judge. Can you imagine a district judge writing a book about jurisdiction and judicial review? Judicial review is a concept embodied in Article 199 of the Constitution, and 99% of our district judges have no idea as to what Article 199 is. And, we're all referring to, even today, to Article 199 and the powers exercised by the high courts as writ jurisdiction, which is a complete misnomer. The true concept is judicial review. And this man, as a district judge in 1982, knew what judicial review was. This is something that perhaps very few people know. That was his first book. And from that book, there were so many concepts that we all learned, especially the concept that I remember even today, and Justice Saqib Nisar more than once, talked about the concept of jurisdictional facts. I will not elaborate on that, but he said more than once that this is something that I learned for the first time from his book, which he wrote as a district judge. That was how remarkable he was. So talking about him as a father is an irrelevance. All great men must be judged by their genius, their works for human race. That is why we continue to distort and shroud history, to put a cloak on personal lives of these men simply to shine the light on the literary matter to which their work was devoted. This is not to detract from the fact that he was an equally great father and a husband, and that made him unique, a rarity among great men. Perhaps the greatest attribute as judge was his firm belief in the relationship of trust theory and power. He was keenly aware of the contribution of the man who loses power, described by Ilham Dilham in his book Free Will. In the face of defeat, they experience their impotence and the illusory character of the power they had. It was not really theirs. It is a truth to which those who wield the power and are drunk with it are blind. While they wield it, they really think they are invulnerable and immortal. The idea of power in Homer's Iliad was close to his heart. Those who are deceived by the idea it gives them that it is there to stay with them, that it is something they hold, and so something they can keep. So when he retired, he did so with a feeling that nobody can appropriate power or make it his own. Where he loses it in due course of time, he is relieved of a heavy burden, and there is a sense of relief rather than one of loss of something that he owns. This is what he embodied, and so I like to recite what Bob Brody wrote in the New York Times. It is as if, having jettisoned so much baggage, I travel lighter now. This was his feeling when he retired. Yet upon retirement, though he did not wield the power as a judge, he embarked upon a journey, as referred by FAZAL Siddiqui Sahab also, to wield an enduring power through his scholarship and literary works. It is only upon his passing that I felt the weight of legacy passed on to me. Since that day, I have not only carried that weight, but I've also wilted under its enormous pressure. It is an honor and a privilege to be his son, but with that comes responsibility. It was an accident of fate that put me in this position, but the scale and sweep of the works of Justice Fazal Karim is hard to fathom unless you are in my position. We had a long animated legal discussions, amongst others. In every book that he wrote, we discussed everything that he wrote, and I was his biggest critic. This is something that not many people know. And he did not discuss this in his books also. So amongst others, he had an uncanny ability to insulate himself from what was going on around him and to just forge ahead, undeterred. This was truly remarkable and irritated me at times, for I would harp on the failing standards of the legal profession, and he would simply retort, "Do thy part." He would just keep back with this answer, "Do thy part." He truly believed that his writings would change the hearts of the heartless and enlighten bigots and the ignorant. But come to think of it, this was the most important lesson he gave me, do thy part. He truly practiced what Martin Luther King said, "Even if I know that tomorrow the world would go to pieces, I would still plant my apple tree." For his beloved students and pupils, he narrated the deathless lines from Hamlet. "We know what we are, but know not what we may be." The creeping religiosity put him on the edge, and he wrote somewhere in his diary, and I read and I would like to share it with you now. पाकिस्तान को बचाने के लिए इतना ही इस्लाम दरकार है जितना कायदे आज़म के पास था. ये वासिफ अली वासिफ ने कहीं ये वासिफ अली वासिफ said it somewhere, and he wrote it in his diary, which from where I picked it up, and I fully endorse what he says. His prayer was, "God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference." Jose Saramago, is a very famous writer who is a Nobel laureate also. He narrated, and I will end with this story, in one of his, in the lectures Nobel laureate, when he was awarded this. In that lecture, he narrated the story of his grandmother, who was very poor, illiterate, and with no luxuries, living from hand to mouth, alone in a poor cottage with her piglets, her source of livelihood, was sitting one evening at the door of her cottage, staring at the biggest and the smallest stars overhead. She said these words, "The world is so beautiful, and it is such a pity that I have to die." She did not say that she was afraid of dying, but that it was a pity to die. People who were sorry to leave life just because the world was beautiful. Justice Fazal Karim thought that the world was beautiful, and it is a pity that he had to die. With his passing, doubtless, the world is less beautiful and the heavens are richer. I would end with a quote inscription on the tombstone of Khalil Gibran, where it is written, Khalil Gibran, you all know, is a Lebanese-American writer. "I am alive like you, and I am standing beside you. God bless his soul." Thank you so much once again.